Hello everyone, and welcome back to Creepy Mr. Night. I know many of you enjoy using these videos to help you sleep, so before you drift off, I thought it'd be fun for everyone to leave a comment, letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. Now, let's get comfy, relax, and begin. Story 1. Jason Turner sat in the security office of Grayson & Wells Jewelers, his eyes half-lidded as he stared at the quiet, almost hypnotic flicker of the security camera feed. The jewelry store was silent. The night shift was always the same, dull, uneventful, and lonely. He took a sip from his coffee mug, the cold, metallic taste doing little to perk him up. It was nearing 3 a.m., and the streets outside were devoid of any activity. The city, the bustling metropolis of luxury and wealth, was asleep, and so was he, in a way. Grayson & Wells was a prestigious establishment, exclusive, expensive, and known for its rare collection of high-end jewelry. The clientele was carefully curated, and the building itself was a fortress of glass and steel. Jason had been working here for 5 years, watching over this fortress in the dead of night, ensuring that no thief or intruder ever dared to cross the line. But the thrill of it had worn off long ago. There was no excitement, no action. Only the hum of the cameras, the blinking lights of the motion sensors, and the occasional creak of the floorboards. Jason was a man of simple habits. He didn't crave excitement. His job was a means to an end. It paid the bills and allowed him to live in a small, quiet apartment on the outskirts of the city. That was enough for him. He had always been the calm one, the quiet one, the exact opposite of his twin brother, Jordan. Jordan was everything Jason was not: charismatic, bold, and reckless. Where Jason sought stability, Jordan craved chaos. They had been close once, sharing a bond that only twins could understand, but that was before their lives took diverging paths. Jason had chosen the straight and narrow, while Jordan had fallen into a life of crime. It was a difference that had gradually eroded their relationship, turning them into strangers, despite their shared blood. As Jason sat there, mindlessly flipping through the security footage, something unusual caught his attention. One of the cameras in the main jewelry display room had shifted. It wasn't supposed to move. The cameras were on a timed loop, positioned meticulously to cover every inch of the room. Jason frowned and leaned closer to the screen. He couldn't quite place what felt off, but something about the way the camera zoomed in on a specific display case seemed strange. He rewound the footage and watched again. For a brief second, the camera caught a flicker, a distortion in the image. He leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowing. The face on the screen didn't look quite like him, though it should have. It was like looking at a reflection in a shattered mirror. His face was familiar, but not entirely his. Jason's heart rate quickened. He wasn't sure what he had seen, but it felt wrong. Unease curled in his stomach, and for the first time in months, he felt a spark of something. Dread, perhaps. Shaking off the feeling, he decided to check the rest of the footage. He had a job to do, after all. But before he could get back to it, the store's alarm system let out a low, ominous beep, signaling something had triggered the silent alarm. Jason's stomach dropped. This wasn't part of his routine. Grayson & Wells was supposed to be secure. He'd checked the locks. The gates were down. No one was supposed to be inside. His mind raced as he grabbed his flashlight and dashed toward the back of the store. But as soon as he reached the security door, he froze. There, standing in the middle of the vault room, where millions of dollars worth of jewels were kept, was a figure. A figure Jason didn't recognize. Jason's pulse pounded in his ears as he took a step back. trying to stay hidden in the shadows. His flashlight flickered unsteadily in his grip. The figure in the vault room moved, but it wasn't like someone robbing the store. It wasn't chaotic, frantic. Instead, there was an eerie calm to the figure's movements, as though they had all the time in the world. The man, Jason was almost sure it was a man, moved methodically, taking the jewels one by one and placing them carefully into a large bag. His steps were quiet, purposeful, and precise. Jason felt a chill crawl down his spine. This wasn't a random robbery. This was planned. The thief knew exactly what they were doing. Jason knew he had to act, but something rooted him to the spot. The intruder didn't seem to notice him, maybe because he hadn't made a sound. It wasn't until the figure moved toward the exit that Jason finally stepped forward, almost without thinking. "Stop!" Jason shouted. The thief whirled around, his face concealed by a black mask. For a brief moment their eyes met, and Jason's stomach twisted. The man's eyes, they weren't unfamiliar. There was something about them, something haunting. The thief didn't hesitate. In a swift motion, he grabbed a nearby chair and tossed it toward Jason, knocking the flashlight from his hands. It clattered to the floor as Jason scrambled backward, heart hammering in his chest. The thief bolted for the back exit, and Jason, instinctively, gave chase. He wasn't thinking clearly. His mind was clouded with confusion, adrenaline, and fear. He didn't stop to think that the thief might have been waiting for him, or that the whole thing might be a setup. All he knew was that someone was stealing from the store, and he couldn't let it happen. The next morning, when the police arrived, Jason was still in a state of shock. The entire store had been ransacked, the vault emptied. Security footage was examined, and within hours, the news broke. Millions of dollars worth of jewelry had been stolen in a daring heist, and Jason Turner, the mild-mannered security guard, was the prime suspect. Despite the surveillance footage showing him at his post the entire night, seemingly providing an airtight alibi, something about the footage didn't add up. Detective Eleanor Harris was called in to investigate, her sharp eyes and mind immediately noticing the discrepancies. The footage showed Jason on duty, but there were moments, brief, fleeting seconds, when his face appeared different. Not enough for most people to notice, but Eleanor wasn't most people. She saw it. She could tell. The person in the footage wasn't entirely Jason. The face had subtle shifts, almost like it was someone else impersonating him. This wasn't just a case of a lone thief. This was something more sinister, something much bigger. As the investigation unfolded, Eleanor uncovered more than she bargained for. Jason's background seemed too perfect, too clean. A quiet man with a modest job. There had to be more to the story. When Eleanor dug into Jason's family history, she discovered that Jason had an identical twin, Jordan Turner. Unlike Jason, Jordan had a criminal record. He had spent years running scams, dealing in stolen goods, and even been involved in a few high-profile robberies. Eleanor's stomach turned as the pieces started falling into place. Could Jason have been manipulated into the heist by his twin? Or was he involved willingly? Jason insisted he had no knowledge of the robbery. He swore he was just doing his job, that he was confused by the surveillance footage, and that he was absolutely certain he'd been at his post the entire time. But there was something unsettling about his certainty. The more Eleanor looked into Jason's past, the more she found that Jordan had a history of getting into his head, manipulating him, using him as a pawn in a larger game. And now, it seemed like he might have done it again. As Eleanor closed in on Jordan, she was joined by Rachel Brooks, a determined journalist who had been following the case closely. Rachel believed there was something more to the story, something that no one had picked up on yet. Their investigation took them deep into the criminal underworld, to abandoned warehouses and dark alleyways. The truth they uncovered was darker than either of them could have imagined. Jason had been used by his brother, manipulated into playing a role in the heist. But what was more chilling was the discovery that Jordan had been orchestrating a long-term revenge plot against Jason. The heist was just the beginning. The jewels were only a means to an end. The real goal was to destroy Jason's life, piece by piece. Eleanor and Rachel finally confronted Jason with the evidence. They showed him the photographs, the plans, the blueprints. Jason's face turned pale as he realized the horrifying truth. His brother had planned this all along, using Jason as an unwitting accomplice. But what disturbed him more was the realization that, in a way, he had been a willing participant. He had been manipulated, yes, but he had never questioned it. The guilt began to consume him. Sarah Miller sat hunched over her desk, her eyes fixated on the glowing screen in front of her. As a graphic designer, her days were filled with color schemes, layouts, and brand identities. It wasn't glamorous, but it was her quiet, comfortable life in a bustling city. She had grown accustomed to the urban noise, the honking horns, the chatter of pedestrians, and the distant murmur of traffic. But tonight, the city felt different. It was late, almost midnight, when she finally wrapped up her work. A small sigh of relief escaped her lips as she clicked the send button on her final email. The caffeine from earlier had long worn off, and she was more than ready to head home. The streets outside were quieter now, with only a few people scattered here and there, all walking with purpose. As Sarah stepped out of the building, her heels echoed on the pavement. The night air was cool, a sharp contrast to the warmth of the office. She pulled her scarf tighter around her neck and quickened her pace. There was a slight unease in the back of her mind, a nagging feeling that something was off. She chalked it up to fatigue and tried to shake the thought. The city had never felt unsafe before, so why now? But as she turned a corner, she saw him. The man was standing at the far end of the street, just beyond the glow of a streetlight. At first, Sarah thought he was just another late-night wanderer, but then she noticed his smile. It wasn't the casual, friendly smile of a passerby. It was wide, unnaturally wide, and stretched from ear to ear. The grin was so exaggerated, so grotesque, that it looked more like a twisted mask than something human. His eyes gleamed in the darkness, but there was something off about them, something empty, hollow, like he wasn't really looking at her, but through her. A chill ran down her spine. She hesitated, her heart starting to race. It was as if he knew she was staring, and he wasn't moving, just standing there, grinning. She forced herself to look away, urging her legs to move, to get away from him. But as she walked, she felt his presence following her, always, just at the edge of her vision, never fully stepping into view. Each time she glanced over her shoulder, his grin remained, unwavering, like a shadow trailing her every step. By the time Sarah reached her apartment building, her pulse was pounding in her ears. She fumbled with her keys, heart racing. As soon as the door slammed shut behind her, she leaned against it, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Was it real? Had she imagined it? Her phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her out of her panic. It was a text from her best friend, Emma. Late night? You okay? Just a weird feeling. I'll be fine. Just tired. Talk tomorrow. She quickly typed back, trying to calm herself down. But sleep didn't come easily that night. Every time she closed her eyes, the image of the man's grin flashed behind her eyelids. His hollow eyes stared back at her. She could still hear the sound of his feet following hers, the hollow echo of footsteps just behind her, always just out of reach. The following day, Sarah tried to shake off the encounter. It was probably just her imagination, fueled by exhaustion and a late-night work deadline. She told herself she'd never seen the man in the street before, that there had to be some logical explanation. But as the days went on, the unease grew. She started noticing the man more frequently, not in the same place, but always lurking just out of her direct line of sight. She'd catch glimpses of him through windows, in the reflection of store windows, or even standing in darkened doorways. The same wide, unsettling grin, the same lifeless, empty eyes. One night, after another encounter where she swore she saw him standing across the street from her apartment, Sarah's terror reached a breaking point. She couldn't take it anymore. Her fingers trembling, she dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? A calm voice answered. I think I'm being followed. There's a man. He's been following me for days. He has this smile. It's not right. Please, you have to help me. Her words came out in frantic bursts, her chest tight with fear. Ma'am, we'll send someone right away. Stay inside and lock your doors. Don't open up for anyone. Sarah hung up, feeling a slight sense of relief that help was on the way. But the fear didn't subside. Within minutes, 2 officers arrived at her apartment building. She explained the situation to them, her voice quivering. One officer listened patiently, while the other paced nervously around the apartment, inspecting the surroundings. Okay, we're going to take a look at the surveillance footage, the first officer said. They went through the building's security footage, scanning for any trace of the man she described. Sarah felt her stomach drop as they paused the footage. There she was, walking down the street, looking over her shoulder, with fear etched on her. The officer looked at Sarah, his brow furrowing. Ma'am, we don't see anyone else on the footage. Are you sure about this? I swear he was there, Sarah cried, panic rising again. He's real. He was standing right there. He's following me. The officer remained silent for a moment, then sighed. We can't find any trace of this man. It's possible you might have seen someone, but without evidence, there's nothing we can do. We suggest you get some rest and avoid walking alone at night for a while. The words felt like a dismissal. Sarah watched helplessly as the officers left, their faces impassive, their steps echoing in the hallway. As soon as the door clicked shut, Sarah felt the weight of her terror settle back over her. There was no evidence. No one believed her, and the man's grin still haunted her. Days passed, and the smiling man seemed to grow bolder. His appearances were more frequent, and Sarah's mind became a battlefield between logic and terror. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Desperation clawed at her. She had to know more. In a quiet corner of the local library, surrounded by old newspapers and dusty files, Sarah began her search for answers. She scoured the archives, reading articles about disappearances, strange sightings, and unsettling occurrences. And it didn't take long for her to find something that sent a cold shiver down her spine. There were other reports, dozens of them, all from years past, all describing a man with the same grotesque grin. Victims who reported being stalked, terrorized, and followed before vanishing without a trace. One article from the 1970s even mentioned a case eerily similar to hers, but none of the reports ever mentioned the man's true identity. None of the disappearances had been solved. And then, Sarah found the most chilling detail. The smiling man wasn't just a local phenomenon. His appearances seemed to follow a pattern. He appeared, terrorized his victims, and then they were gone, leaving no trace behind. The disappearances stretched back decades, each case becoming more mysterious, more unsettling than the last. As Sarah pored over the old newspaper clippings, her mind raced. The further back she went, the more cases she uncovered. Each one was eerily similar to her own. Individuals who'd experienced bizarre, unsettling encounters with a man whose smile was said to be almost unnatural. His grin was described as a grotesque, otherworldly feature, and his presence seemed to coincide with a growing sense of dread before the victims vanished. In one particularly chilling article, Sarah found a case from the 1980s. A woman named Laura Green had disappeared after claiming she was followed by a man with a smile too wide to be human. There were police records about Laura's nervous breakdown, reports from neighbors who had seen her speaking to herself, and eventually, her disappearance. The police had found no sign of her, no body, no clues, only a string of bizarre events leading up to her vanishing. The final chilling detail: a witness claimed to have seen a man matching Sarah's description of the smiling man the night before she disappeared. But it was the last piece of evidence that truly rattled Sarah. A police sketch. It depicted a man with an exaggerated grin, the same one Sarah had seen, only this time, the image was drawn in the 1970s, long before Sarah was born. The uncanny resemblance was too much to ignore. Her fingers trembled as she sifted through more files, hoping for a clue that would explain this nightmare. But the more she found, the clearer it became. The smiling man wasn't a coincidence. He was part of something far darker, something that had been repeating itself for decades. Her stomach churned with the thought. Was she simply the latest in a long line of victims, or was there something more at play here? With no answers in sight, Sarah decided to contact Detective Michael Hayes, a local investigator who had worked on several missing person cases over the years. He was known for his sharp mind and unyielding determination. Maybe, just maybe, he could help her piece together the mystery. The next morning, Sarah dialed his number. Detective Hayes was gruff on the phone, but agreed to meet with her. They decided to meet at a small diner in the city, where Sarah had hoped to keep things casual. But the moment they sat down, the gravity of the conversation took hold. "Ms. Miller," Hayes said, his voice low and steady, "I'm not in the business of entertaining conspiracy theories, but I've seen enough over the years to know when something's off. What exactly are you asking me to believe?" Sarah took a deep breath, and without hesitation, recounted her encounters with the smiling man. The strange grin, the way he seemed to appear out of nowhere, the way he stalked her from the shadows. She told him about the research she'd done, the history of disappearances, and the police sketch that was hauntingly familiar. Hayes listened in silence, occasionally nodding. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and stared at her, his eyes narrow. "This man, or whatever he is, isn't new," he said slowly. "And it's not just you. There are a lot more people out there who've had similar experiences. People who've disappeared, and their cases have gone cold." "Why haven't I heard about any of this?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "Because the cases were either dismissed as mental breakdowns, or just forgotten," Hayes replied. "The police, the press, they all have their way of sweeping things under the rug. But I've been following the thread for years, even if I didn't have a name to put to it. I've seen these disappearances before, and I've been trying to make sense of them, trying to understand what connects them." Sarah felt a surge of hope. For the first time, someone else seemed to believe her. "I've been hearing about this for years, but it never clicked," Hayes continued. "There's a pattern to the way the victims vanish. They're always marked by this smile. This man. But no one has ever connected the dots until now. Sarah leaned forward, eager to understand more. What do you think it means? Hayes rubbed his chin thoughtfully. I think it's something much worse than we've imagined, and I think you're in danger. Just as Sarah thought things couldn't get any worse, they did. Hayes suggested they involve a journalist, Lena Porter, a well-known investigative reporter who had covered numerous unsolved disappearances in the city. Lena had been known for her controversial exposés, and though her methods were unconventional, she had a reputation for uncovering truths that others couldn't, or wouldn't, touch. They met Lena at a local coffee shop later that afternoon. She was sharp, no nonsense, and immediately took an interest in Sarah's case. This story is bigger than you think, Lena said, flipping through the files Sarah had brought with her. You've got the makings of a headline grabber here, but if we're going to do this right, we need more than just your personal experience. We need to find more witnesses, find someone who's seen him, someone who's survived, and if we're lucky, we can tie this back to the other disappearances. Over the next week, the trio worked tirelessly, combing through old police records, speaking to potential witnesses, and tracking down anyone who had survived an encounter with the smiling man. Each lead felt like it was leading them deeper into a labyrinth, but none of them were prepared for what they would uncover. As the investigation grew more intense, Sarah's life continued to unravel. The smiling man's appearances grew more frequent, his grin more menacing with each passing day. He was always just out of reach, lurking in dark corners, following her in crowded streets, or appearing in reflections of store windows. His grin never wavered, never shifted, as though he was always watching, always waiting. Sarah could no longer tell if she was losing her mind or if something truly monstrous was out there, hunting her. One evening, while meeting with Lena and Hayes, Sarah received an unexpected phone call. It was a tip, a man who claimed to have seen the smiling man years ago. He had been a young boy at the time, hiding in a park when he'd seen a tall figure standing across the street, grinning as though waiting for something. The boy had run home in fear, but his father had dismissed it as just an overactive imagination. The man who had called Sarah was now older, but the memory of that night had haunted him. He claimed that after seeing the smiling man, strange occurrences began to happen in the city. Random disappearances, unexplained deaths, and, more disturbingly, a series of eerie events tied directly to the man's smile. The connection was clear. Wherever the smiling man appeared, something terrible followed. The last words the man spoke before hanging up chilled Sarah to her core. Don't look for him. If you find him, he'll find you. The walls seemed to close in on Sarah as the investigation reached its peak. She no longer felt safe in her own home, nor in the crowded streets where she once walked without fear. The smiling man's presence was inescapable, but there was one final clue, one last piece of the puzzle that might explain everything. As Sarah sat with Lena and Hayes in a darkened office, the truth began to take shape. The smiling man wasn't just a figure of terror. He was something far older, far more ancient than any of them had imagined. His origins were linked to a dark force, one that had been passed down through generations. The man with the smile was a predator, not merely stalking his victims for fun, but feeding on their fear, on their terror. Each disappearance, each death, added to his strength. The truth was more terrifying than Sarah could have ever imagined. The smiling man wasn't simply an urban legend. He was a living nightmare, a manifestation of pure terror, a being that preyed on human fear, feeding off it like a parasite. And with every victim he claimed, his power grew. Now, as Sarah stood at the edge of her investigation, she realized the unthinkable. She was about to face the smiling man in a final deadly confrontation. Would she survive? Or would she, like so many before her, vanish without a trace? Rachel Foster had always been calm under pressure. It was a trait that made her an excellent 911 dispatcher in Maple Ridge, a small, quiet suburban town nestled in the heart of the Pacific Northwest. The type of place where neighbors knew each other's names, where the biggest problem most people faced was a barking dog or a lost cat. But Rachel's job was far from mundane. She handled calls every day that ranged from car accidents and medical emergencies to domestic disputes. Each day, she sat in the dimly lit dispatch center, her fingers dancing over the keys of the computer as she processed calls, her voice steady and clear as she guided first responders to the scene. Rachel was no stranger to the pressure. In fact, she thrived on it. Some would say she had a sixth sense, an ability to stay calm and collected in the face of chaos, an unshakable calmness that came from years of experience and a deep-rooted desire to help. She had been with the Maple Ridge Police Department for over 6 years, and over the years, she had encountered her fair share of horror stories. But despite the tragic calls she handled, Rachel managed to keep a healthy emotional distance from her work. It was the only way to survive. Outside of her work, Rachel was an introvert. She spent most of her time in her modest apartment, reading, watching old movies, or occasionally getting a drink with her colleagues at a nearby bar. Life was quiet for Rachel, predictable. It wasn't that she didn't want excitement or thrill, but after a traumatic childhood that had left her emotionally scarred, she had found solace in routine. And it was that routine that was about to be shattered. It was a cold autumn evening when everything changed. The sky had turned a dull gray, the clouds hanging low like an oppressive weight. Rachel was finishing up her shift when the phone rang, a late call, just before her scheduled break. She answered it without hesitation, expecting it to be a routine call. 911, what's your emergency? She asked, her voice calm and professional. But instead of the usual panicked voice on the other end of the line, there was only a soft, static-filled whisper. It was barely audible, but Rachel's trained ear caught the words, sending an immediate chill down her spine. Help, help, please, they're still here. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. This was not a prank call. She could tell immediately from the tone in the voice. It was terrified, desperate. Who's there? Where are you? Can you tell me what's happening? Rachel asked, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, ready to dispatch help. I'm trapped, the voice whispered, its tremor almost unbearable to listen to. They're coming. They won't stop. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just another emergency. There was something deeply wrong. She reached for the call tracing button, but the voice continued, growing weaker, more frantic. Where are you? Please just tell me where you are. I'll send help immediately. But there was no response. The call went dead. Rachel stared at the phone, her mind racing. What had just happened? Who had called? The voice sounded so real, so terrified, yet it was impossible to trace the number. It had been blocked, and when Rachel attempted to call it back, the line went straight to voicemail. Her mind began to churn with theories. Perhaps it was a glitch, or maybe a prankster. But no matter how hard she tried to convince herself it was nothing, the feeling of dread lingered in her chest. There was something about that voice, something familiar. The next morning, Rachel couldn't stop thinking about the call. It was just one of those things, she thought, an anomaly in the system. But as the days went on, the calls continued. Every night, At exactly the same time, the same voice would call in, whispering the same terrified words. Rachel had no idea that the nightmarish calls were just the beginning of something far darker, something that would force her to confront not only the past of Maple Ridge, but the terrifying mystery of the Holloway house, a place that had burned down years ago, taking with it a family whose tragic end was only the beginning of a haunting that would not rest until its story was told. As the days passed, Rachel found herself haunted by the strange, desperate voice on the phone. She had dismissed the first call as a fluke, a glitch in the system, or maybe even a prank, but the calls kept coming, night after night. At first, they came at irregular intervals, but as the days wore on, they became more frequent, more urgent. Always from the same blocked number, always from the same place. 911, what's your emergency? Rachel would answer each time, though her voice grew more strained with each call. Every time, the same whispering voice on the other end, always whispering the same words. Help. Please. They're still here. Rachel would try to keep her composure, but her hands shook as she gripped the receiver. The voice grew more frantic as the days passed. I'm trapped. Please. They're coming. They're in the walls. They won't stop. Rachel's thoughts were consumed by the voice. Was it just a prankster, or was it something more? The more she thought about it, the more unsettled she became. One night, after she finished her shift, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She had tried calling the number back every time, but it always went straight to voicemail. No one would ever answer. Frustration gnawed at her. Who was this person? Why couldn't she trace the call? The voice, though, had said something that stuck with her. The Holloway house. The fire. It didn't end. The Holloway house. The words echoed in her mind. The name felt familiar, but Rachel couldn't quite place it. She'd been so focused on her work over the years that she'd never thought much about the town's history. But something about that name triggered a vague memory, one she couldn't quite grasp. She couldn't ignore it any longer. It was time to investigate. The next morning, Rachel couldn't focus on anything else. The voice from the calls, the haunting whispers, the name Holloway House, consumed her thoughts. She couldn't stop wondering why the caller had mentioned the house. What did it have to do with the tragedy they were so desperately trying to communicate? After her shift, Rachel went straight to the town library. It was a small, quaint building with dusty old bookshelves, the smell of aged paper filling the air. The librarian, Mrs. Dunlop, gave Rachel a warm smile as she entered. Mrs. Dunlop was always friendly, but Rachel could tell she wasn't one to talk much about the town's past. "Hi, Mrs. Dunlop," Rachel said, trying to keep her tone casual. "I was hoping you could help me find some old records. About a fire, I think it was, years ago." Mrs. Dunlop's expression shifted, a flicker of discomfort crossing her face. "Which fire, dear?" she asked, her voice a little too quiet. "The Holloway house fire," Rachel replied, not sensing the unease in Mrs. Dunlop's voice. At the mention of the name, Mrs. Dunlop's smile faltered. She hesitated before responding. "Ah, yes. The Holloway house. That was a terrible tragedy. It happened a long time ago, though. 15 years, if I recall correctly. The fire. It destroyed the entire family. The parents, Samuel and Lisa, and their 2 children, Ben and Emma. Everyone except Emma, that is." She paused, and Rachel noticed the unsettling way Mrs. Dunlop said Emma's name, as though it carried a deeper weight. "Emma wasn't found?" Rachel asked, her voice steady, despite the unsettling turn in the conversation. Mrs. Dunlop shook her head. "Number There were rumors, of course, but no one could ever find her. The fire was blamed on faulty wiring, but some say it was more than just an accident. There were whispers that Emma was locked away in the house, hidden from the others, but no one knew for sure. She was never found. And some people think she's still out there, still haunting the place. Rachel's heart began to race. She felt a strange pull inside her chest, an urge to know more, to find out what had really happened. "Do you have any records or articles about the fire?" she asked, her voice quieter now. Mrs. Dunlop studied Rachel for a long moment, her eyes narrowed with something like suspicion. "I think you should be careful, Rachel. That house, it's been abandoned for years. People say it's cursed. People who get too close, well, they don't come back the same. The past isn't something you should dig up." Rachel's breath caught in her throat. Mrs. Dunlop's warning only fueled her curiosity. She had to know more. That evening, Rachel met with Detective James Miller at a local cafe. She had heard about him from some of the other officers at the station. James was a quiet, methodical man who had been a rookie cop when the Holloway fire happened. As soon as Rachel started asking about the case, James's demeanor shifted. He didn't seem eager to talk about it, but he was also too professional to turn her away. "So, you want to know about the Holloway fire?" James said, stirring his coffee absently. "It was a tragic situation, a family destroyed, a town shaken, but there are things about that fire that don't sit right with me." Rachel leaned in, her voice hushed. "What do you mean? What didn't sit right?" James looked around, as though making sure no one was listening. The investigation was rushed. The scene was chaotic. There were rumors that Samuel Holloway, the father, wasn't exactly the man he seemed to be. There was some talk about him being involved in illegal dealings, maybe even making enemies, but none of it was ever proven. And Emma, well, she was the wild card. "The wild card?" Rachel repeated. "Yeah. No one knows what happened to her. The fire was ruled an accident, but I always thought it was more than that. Some of the other officers thought so too. We had reports of a locked room on the second floor. No one could figure out why it was locked, or why Emma wasn't seen anywhere in the house when the fire broke out." Rachel felt her stomach churn. "A locked room?" James nodded. "There was also talk that Emma wasn't allowed to leave the house much. She was always kept indoors, isolated. Some said she was sick. Others said her father was hiding something dark. But no one knew for sure." Rachel's mind was racing. "You think Samuel Holloway had something to do with his daughter's disappearance?" James sighed. "It's possible. Maybe he locked her away before the fire. Maybe he was trying to hide something he didn't want anyone to find. But we'll never know the truth, because there was no evidence. The fire destroyed everything." Rachel's thoughts whirled as she processed the new information. The locked room, Emma's mysterious disappearance, the voice on the phone. "What do you think happened to her?" Rachel asked softly. James met her gaze, his eyes dark with something unreadable. "I think Emma was a victim, and I think that house, the Holloway house, has been hiding a secret for too long." That night, as Rachel sat in her apartment, the phone rang again. "911, what's your emergency?" she said, her voice more tense than usual. The voice on the other end was desperate, trembling with fear. "Please, help. They're still here." Rachel's blood ran cold. It was the same voice, the same words. "I'm trapped." The voice continued, breaking into sobs. "They won't stop. They never left." Rachel gripped the receiver, her heart pounding in her chest. "Who's there? Where are you?" The voice grew even more frantic. "The Holloway house. The fire didn't end. They're still here. They're watching me." They're waiting. The call cut off. Rachel's hand trembled as she set the phone down. This time, she couldn't ignore it. The Holloway house, the locked room, Emma's disappearance, the voice. It all connected. The calls, the past, the house. It was all part of something that Rachel couldn't ignore anymore. The mystery had consumed her, and she had to find the truth. The ruins of the Holloway house were a sight to behold. What had once been a large, imposing structure now lay as a charred skeleton, its walls blackened and crumbling, a faint wisp of smoke still rising from the ash. Rachel stood just outside the perimeter of the property, her breath shallow as she stared at the remnants. It felt wrong, like the earth itself didn't want to give up its secrets. The air had an unsettling stillness, as if the house was holding its breath, waiting for something. Every step Rachel took felt like an intrusion, and the silence was suffocating. She knew she couldn't wait for the investigation to yield its answers. Rachel had to take matters into her own hands. She'd already talked to James Miller, the detective, and Sophie Turner, the local historian. But now she needed to see the house herself. The voice had mentioned the locked room, and Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that it was where everything had gone wrong. She took a deep breath, pushing through the unease, and moved toward the remnants of the back door. The wood had long since burned away, leaving behind jagged edges and broken glass. Carefully, she stepped over the debris, the air thick with the scent of soot and decay. The ruins stretched far beyond what she had imagined. She walked slowly, every crack and creak of the foundation sending a shiver down her spine. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. Every so often, Rachel would pause, feeling a sudden drop in temperature, an icy chill that would make her skin prickle. Finally, she arrived at the place she'd been dreading, what had once been the staircase leading to the second floor. Now, only a few broken steps remained, with a vast emptiness above her. But there, in the distance, she noticed something odd, a glimmer, like a shadow that didn't belong. Rachel moved cautiously toward the area, her flashlight cutting through the gloom. There, almost hidden beneath the rubble, was a partially open door. The metal hinges were rusted, and the wood was blackened from the fire, but the door was unmistakable. The locked room. Her pulse quickened as she stepped closer, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the door. It was the same door that had been mentioned in the files, the one that no one had ever been able to open, the one that, Rachel suspected, held the answers to the Holloway family's dark past. With a final deep breath, Rachel pulled the door open, her heart thundering in her chest. What she saw inside made her freeze. The room was small, a mere closet really, but the air was dense with something far heavier than dust. The walls were stained, and the floor was still scorched from the fire that had consumed the house years ago. There were no signs of life, but as Rachel stepped inside, she felt a palpable presence, as though the room was alive with the echoes of something terrible. At first, Rachel thought it was nothing more than the remnants of the fire, broken furniture, discarded personal items. But then she saw it, a set of old, tattered books. Some were burned, but others seemed untouched. And there, in the center of the room, was a small wooden box. Her hands shook as she approached the box. It was old, with intricate carvings, the wood smoothed with age. She bent down and opened it carefully. Inside, Rachel found a small collection of items: a photograph of Emma Holloway as a child, a faded letter, and a journal. The photograph was a family portrait: Samuel, Lisa, Ben, and Emma. But something about Emma's eyes in the picture felt wrong. There was an intensity to them, a look that made Rachel's blood run cold. It was as if Emma knew something the others didn't. Rachel picked up the letter next. It was smudged and yellowed, the ink barely legible, but as she read the words, her stomach churned. To whoever finds this, I fear I may be trapped. The house has secrets that must never be known. Samuel is hiding something from all of us. The fire is no accident, and I fear Emma may be the cause of it all. Her hands trembled as she read, her mind racing. Emma may be the cause of it all? What did this mean? And why had the letter been hidden in this locked room? Before she could process it further, her flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Rachel's heart skipped a beat as she felt a sudden shift in the atmosphere. A chill swept through the room, and then came a sound, a low whisper that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. Help, help, please. The voice. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't the first time she'd heard it, but this time, it felt closer. It felt as if it was inside her head. She turned quickly, scanning the room for any sign of life, but there was nothing. Just the remains of the house and the eerie silence that clung to it like a thick fog. But the whisper didn't stop. They're still here. Rachel's legs felt weak as she backed out of the room. The door slammed shut behind her with a violent force, making her jump. She was alone, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had just witnessed her. Something old, something angry. The whispers faded, but the feeling of dread didn't leave. She had uncovered something, but it wasn't enough. There were more answers to find, more dark secrets to uncover. Rachel didn't sleep that night. Her mind kept returning to the letter she had found, the photograph of Emma, and the haunting whispers that seemed to follow her. The Holloway house was more than just a place of tragedy. It was the epicenter of something far darker. The next day, she returned to the town library to continue her research. She needed more pieces to the puzzle. Sophie Turner had promised to meet her there, and Rachel was desperate for answers. Sophie, a local historian with a deep knowledge of the town's past, greeted Rachel with a concerned look as she entered the library. "You've been to the Holloway house, haven't you?" Sophie asked without preamble. Rachel nodded, her expression grim. "I found something. A letter. It mentioned that Emma might have been the cause of the fire, but it didn't explain what that meant. Do you know anything about it?" Sophie hesitated, then sighed. "There's something you need to understand about the Holloway family. They weren't just a family. They were part of a much larger network, a web of secrets that spanned generations." Rachel leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Sophie's voice dropped to a whisper. Samuel Holloway wasn't just a businessman. He had connections to some very powerful people who were involved in some shady dealings. There were whispers about his ties to illegal activities, but those were never confirmed. What's more troubling is that there are rumors about his involvement with a secret society, one that used the Holloway house for darker purposes. "Like what?" Rachel asked, her heart racing. Sophie looked around the library nervously, ensuring no one was listening. "There are old stories about the house being used as a ritual site. Some believe the fire wasn't just an accident. It was part of a larger scheme. Emma. She was the key. She was caught in the middle of something she didn't understand. She was supposed to be sacrificed." Rachel's blood ran cold. "Sacrificed?" Sophie nodded. "It's an old legend. The Holloway family was involved in something that required the death of one of their own. They say Emma was supposed to be the one to die, but something went wrong. The fire, the locked room. It was all part of the ritual. Emma. She's still trapped in the house, her spirit tied to whatever evil took place there." Rachel's mind was racing. She knew she had to find Emma, to put an end to the haunting. But she also knew that the more she uncovered, the more dangerous it became. Rachel's investigation had led her to a horrifying truth. Emma Holloway wasn't just a victim of a tragic fire. She had been a victim of something far darker, something tied to a sinister ritual. The Holloway family's legacy wasn't one of love or innocence. It was one of darkness, power, and manipulation. And Emma's restless spirit was trapped within the ruins, still crying out for help. Now, Rachel faced a terrifying choice: bring justice to the Holloway family, or risk the malevolent force that had been haunting the house for years, claiming her too. As the walls of the Holloway house closed in on her, Rachel made her decision. She would confront the darkness. She would end the cycle. The final confrontation would test Rachel's courage, her sanity, and her understanding of reality itself. The Holloway house wanted something more than just answers. It wanted a price, and Rachel was willing to pay it. Alex Carter, a seasoned customs agent at the busy port of Los Angeles, was no stranger to the usual array of imports and exports. He had sifted through mountains of cargo, checking everything from expensive electronics to mundane shipments of food and textiles. But today was different. As the conveyor belt moved with precision, carrying an endless stream of crates and packages for inspection, Alex's sharp eyes scanned the shipment manifest for any inconsistencies. The paperwork was standard, but one particular box caught his attention. It wasn't large, nor did it seem particularly valuable. A simple wooden crate, unmarked, with only a single stamp, reading fragile. But something about it felt off. "Hey, Carter," his colleague Mike called out from across the inspection area, distracted by another shipment. "Everything good?" Alex barely glanced up as he ran his hands over the rough edges of the box, feeling a strange tingling sensation as his fingers brushed against the surface. "Yeah, all fine," he muttered absently. He grabbed his crowbar and popped open the crate. Inside, nestled between packing peanuts, was a small wooden puzzle box, intricately carved with ancient symbols Alex didn't recognize. His curiosity piqued. He gently lifted the box and examined it more closely. It was smooth, old, and well-made, far more sophisticated than anything he'd seen come through the port before. There was a peculiar, almost imperceptible weight to it, like it held something valuable or dangerous. Still, Alex was no stranger to bizarre trinkets arriving through customs. Most were harmless, part of some elaborate smuggling scheme or an innocent collector's piece. With a flick of his wrist, Alex twisted the sides of the box, solving the puzzle effortlessly. Inside, he found a single gold key, beautifully crafted, with a strange symbol etched into the shaft. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen before. He examined the key closely, turning it in his hand. It felt heavy for its size, almost as if it held more than just its weight. He ran his finger over the symbol, wondering if it had any significance. "Weird," he muttered, tossing the key back into the box. Shrugging, Alex placed the box in a designated area for storage, intending to inform his supervisor about the oddity later. But deep down, a small part of him couldn't shake the feeling that this little discovery might be more important than he initially thought. The smugglers were silent for a moment. Then Daniel spoke again. "That key leads to something far bigger than you can imagine. A vault, hidden somewhere in the world, filled with priceless artifacts worth billions. Stolen treasures, hidden by a network of criminals that goes back centuries." Alex's skepticism kicked in, but something about Daniel's expression made him second-guess his doubts. The smugglers seemed far too calm, almost as if they were speaking the truth. They had been caught in the act of smuggling, but they weren't acting like typical criminals. Maria's eyes glittered with dark knowledge. The key you found is just one part of a much larger puzzle. There are others, scattered across the globe, and once all the pieces are in place, the vault will be opened. The Alvazari network has been hiding treasures for centuries, and now, it's your turn to find it. Alex felt a chill run down his spine. The words, Alvazari network, had a familiar ring to them, but he couldn't place where he had heard them before. Still, one thing was certain. This was no ordinary smuggling operation. It was much bigger, far more dangerous. Before Alex could respond, Maria added, "You don't understand the depth of this. The vault is only the beginning. Once you open it, everything changes, and you'll find yourself in a world of trouble you can't even begin to comprehend." Alex found himself caught in a tangled web of conspiracy, crime, and mystery. The more he investigated, the more dangerous things became. It wasn't just the smugglers who were after the key. There were other, more powerful players involved. International crime syndicates, corrupt art dealers, and even politicians. Alex's partner in this investigation, Lena Phillips, a former art theft investigator, had been brought in to help. Lena was smart, calculating, and driven by a desire for justice. She had worked on numerous high-profile cases in the past, and her expertise made her invaluable in this case. Still, even she was hesitant about diving headfirst into a global crime syndicate that had been operating for centuries. "Alex," Lena said as they reviewed the notes they'd gathered from the smugglers, "this goes beyond just stolen artifacts. There's a massive network in place. The Alvazari network isn't just about money. It's about power and control." Alex rubbed his temples, his mind racing. "So what do we do now?" "We know the key leads to a vault, but where do we even start looking?" Lena leaned over the map spread out on the table. "We track down the other pieces of the puzzle, and we follow the trail back to the Alvazari network. But be careful. They've been operating under the radar for centuries. This is bigger than anything we've dealt with before." Alex nodded, feeling the weight of the investigation bearing down on him. He knew they were in over their heads, but he couldn't stop now. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous things became, and the further they went, the more Alex realized that someone, or something, was watching them. The investigation had become far more complicated than Alex had initially expected. As he and Lena delved deeper into the mystery of the Alvazari network, it became clear that there were other players in the game, players who were far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. Victor Rivas, leader of the Echelon Group, was no mere crime lord. He was a strategist, a man who knew how to manipulate both people and situations to his advantage. His group was involved in everything from smuggling to assassination, and their reach extended far beyond what Alex and Lena had initially anticipated. It was late one evening when Alex received a tip that Rivas's men were tracking their movements. They had been spotted in a parking garage, tailing Lena's car. "We need to move fast," Alex said, urgency in his voice. "Rivas's people are closing in on us." Lena looked grim. "We don't have much time. If they're already onto us, we need to go underground." Alex nodded. He had no choice but to trust her. She had been a former investigator with the FBI's art theft division, but something in her demeanor had shifted recently. The deeper they got into the case, the more distant she seemed. The unease in Alex's chest had grown since the sting operation. There were moments when he felt like she was keeping something from him. But now wasn't the time to question her loyalty. He had bigger problems on his hands. They made their way to a nondescript hotel in a quiet part of the city, hoping it would provide temporary cover. Lena took the lead, her eyes constantly scanning the surroundings, alert for any signs of Rivas's men. Inside the room, Lena locked the door and pulled out a map, spreading it across the small table. "We need to get to this location," she said, pointing to a place marked in red on the map, a remote estate outside of the city. "It's a location where one of the pieces of the puzzle is hidden. We'll need to be discreet. No one can know we're going there." Alex studied her face closely. There was something in her eyes, a hesitation, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. "Why the secrecy?" he asked. "Why don't we bring in some backup?" Lena's expression hardened. "We can't. Trust me on this. If we bring in anyone else, we'll lose the advantage. This is about the vault, Alex. And the vault is more than just stolen treasures. It's the key to taking down an international conspiracy. We can't let anyone get in our way." Alex was silent for a moment. The pressure of the investigation, the looming threat from Rivas, and the increasing tension with Lena weighed heavily on him. Still, his instincts told him that Lena was right. They had to keep moving forward. They were close to the truth. The problem was, Alex wasn't sure if he could trust Lena entirely anymore. The drive to the remote estate was long, and the night was thick with tension. As they neared their destination, Lena grew more focused, her hands gripping the steering wheel with a firmness that told Alex she wasn't nervous. She was preparing for something. Alex, on the other hand, couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. His thoughts kept circling back to the strange distance he had felt from Lena recently. She was hiding something, and as much as he wanted to trust her, a nagging voice in the back of his mind told him to be cautious. They arrived at the estate just before dawn, the sprawling mansion looming in the distance, surrounded by a high iron gate. Lena swiped a keycard she had gotten from an anonymous source, and they quickly made their way inside. The building was dimly lit, with long hallways and rooms filled with antiquities that seemed out of place in such a modern setting. Lena led Alex through the winding halls, stopping at a hidden door near the back. She placed her hand on a secret lever, and the door clicked open to reveal a narrow staircase leading down into the darkness. "We're close," she said quietly, her voice strained with anticipation. As they descended into the cellar, Alex couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of dread. The atmosphere was oppressive, the air thick with dust, and the scent of something long forgotten. The staircase led them to a cavernous room, illuminated only by the dim glow of a single hanging light bulb. In the center of the room was a massive stone pedestal, and atop it rested an intricately designed chest. Alex's breath caught as he saw the symbols etched into the wood, symbols that matched the ones on the key he had found in the puzzle box. "This is it," Lena said, her voice a whisper. "This is the final piece. The vault is hidden behind it." Alex approached cautiously, his heart pounding. The key in his pocket felt like it was burning a hole in his chest. He couldn't believe they were so close. Lena moved toward the chest, her eyes narrowing with focus. "This is where everything changes, Alex," she murmured. "The vault holds more than just artifacts. It holds the evidence, the proof of everything, the crimes, the corruption. If we unlock this, we can destroy the Alvazari network once and for all." Alex stepped closer, his fingers tightening around the key in his pocket. But as Lena turned to unlock the chest, a chill ran down his spine. Something was wrong. Suddenly, Lena whipped around, and before Alex could react, she lunged at him with unexpected force. He stumbled backward as she grabbed his wrist, twisting it painfully. The key slipped from his hand, clattering to the floor. You were never meant to know," she hissed, her eyes glowing with a cold, deadly resolve. Alex's heart raced as he realized the shocking truth. Lena had been playing him all along. She wasn't working with him to expose the network. She was part of it. "Lena," he gasped, struggling to break free of her grip. You were working with Rivas all along?" She smiled, a bitter smile that made Alex's blood run cold. "I didn't have a choice. You think the Echelon group would let me walk away? They've had their eyes on me for a long time. They knew I'd find you, and I knew you'd eventually lead me here." Alex's mind raced as he tried to make sense of the betrayal. The Lena he had trusted, the one who had been his ally in this mission, was nothing more than a pawn in Rivas's game. "Why?" Alex asked, breathless from the struggle. Lena's eyes flickered with a hint of regret, but it was quickly replaced by the coldness of someone who had long since abandoned morality. "Power, Alex. Money. You think I'm the only one who's been bought off in this game? The vault holds more than just evidence of crimes. It holds control. Everything you've been looking for. Everything you've been fighting for. And now it's mine." With a final swift motion, Lena shoved Alex to the ground, grabbing the key from the floor. She moved quickly, unlocking the chest and opening it wide. The chest creaked open, revealing a small compartment filled with documents, maps, and old photographs. It was a treasure trove of information, but Alex barely had time to process what he was seeing. The vault wasn't just about stolen artifacts. It was a catalog of corruption, blackmail, and a global conspiracy that reached every corner of the world. But there was no time to dwell on it. Lena was already moving to escape, the key and the chest now in her possession. Alex knew he had one chance to stop her. The realization hit Alex like a freight train. Lena had betrayed him, and now she was holding all the cards. As the vault creaked open, Alex's mind raced. He had to stop her. He couldn't let her get away with the key, the chest, and everything it represented. The information inside wasn't just valuable. It was the key to exposing the criminal network that spanned continents. If Lena escaped with it, everything they had worked for would be lost. "Lena," Alex shouted, pushing himself up from the cold stone floor. "You don't have to do this." But Lena didn't turn. She was already moving toward the exit with the chest and the key, her steps quick and sure. She wasn't running. She was leaving, confident that she had won. Alex felt a surge of anger and fear. He couldn't let her go. Not now. Without thinking, he lunged forward, grabbing her arm and spinning her around. The momentum caused them both to tumble to the floor, the chest clattering beside them. Lena snarled, her face twisted with fury. "Let go of me, Alex," she hissed, pushing against his chest. "You should have stayed out of this. You were never meant to be part of it." But Alex wasn't backing down. "I'm not letting you take this," he growled, his hands tightening around her wrist. With a swift movement, Lena kneed him in the stomach, knocking the wind out of him. Alex gasped, stumbling back. She was quick, far quicker than he had anticipated. In one fluid motion, Lena reached for the key, preparing to lock the chest again. But Alex wasn't done. He had to think. He had to act. "Why, Lena?" he shouted as he scrambled to his feet. "Was it all for money? Power?" She paused for just a moment, a fleeting flicker of hesitation in her eyes. For that split second, Alex thought he might reach her. But the look quickly vanished, replaced by cold resolve. "It's not about money, Alex," Lena said, her voice low and dangerous. "It's about survival. The Echelon group doesn't forgive. Once you're in, there's no way out. You're either with them or you're dead. I don't have a choice." The words hit Alex like a slap. He had known that the world they were diving into was dangerous, but hearing Lena's confession struck him to the core. She wasn't the cold-blooded criminal he had imagined. She was a woman trapped by the very same system that they were trying to bring down. But there was no time for sympathy. He couldn't afford to lose her now, not with the fate of everything they had uncovered hanging in the balance. Before Lena could make another move, Alex grabbed the chest and yanked it from her hands. The two of them struggled, the chest swinging dangerously as they fought for control. In the chaos, the key slipped from the chest, landing on the stone floor with a sharp clink. Time seemed to slow down as both of them reached for it at the same moment. Alex's fingers brushed the cool metal just as Lena's hand closed around it. Their eyes locked in that instant, one filled with desperate determination, the other cold and calculating. "I'm not letting you walk away with it," Alex said, his voice a mixture of anger and desperation. Lena's lips curled into a bitter smile. "You don't have a choice, Alex. You're too deep now. You won't survive this." But Alex wasn't listening anymore. With every ounce of strength, he pulled the key from her grasp, throwing it across the room, far from her reach. Before she could react, Alex dove for the chest and ran toward the exit, the weight of the documents and photographs inside pressing heavily on his mind. The evidence was too crucial. He had to get it out, no matter what. Lena cursed behind him, her voice shrill. "You can't outrun me, Alex." Alex's heart pounded as he sprinted through the dimly lit halls of the mansion. The walls seemed to close in on him as he reached the staircase, but his legs burned with the sheer adrenaline that fueled his escape. He was close. He was almost there. The sound of footsteps echoed behind him. Lena was coming, but Alex had one advantage: the chest. He pushed forward, reaching the front door. Just as he was about to break through, he heard the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. A sharp pain seared through his side, and Alex stumbled, falling to the ground. The chest slipped from his hands, crashing onto the floor. His vision blurred, but he could still hear Lena's voice, her mocking laughter. "Did you really think you could win, Alex?" Lena's voice rang out. "This is bigger than you. You're nothing but a pawn." Alex gritted his teeth, trying to push through the pain. He couldn't let her win. Not like this. Not when everything was so close. Lena took a step closer, and just as she raised her gun again, the sound of a car engine roaring outside echoed through the air. A familiar voice shouted from the driveway, "Alex, move!" Without thinking, Alex's instincts kicked in. He scrambled to his feet, grabbing the chest, and threw himself out the door. The car screeched to a halt, and Alex dove into the passenger seat just as Lena fired another shot, narrowly missing him. The engine roared again, and the car sped off into the night. The world outside the car blurred as they raced down the winding roads, but Alex barely noticed. His side burned where the bullet had grazed him, but the adrenaline kept him moving. He turned to his rescuer, Detective James Miller. How did you find me?" Alex rasped, still catching his breath. Miller glanced at him briefly, his face grim. "We've been tracking the Echelon group for months. I didn't know how deep you were in, but when I saw Lena betray you back there, I figured it was time to make a move." Alex shook his head, disbelief still clouding his thoughts. "Lena. She was working with Rivas all along." Miller nodded, his expression hardening. "She's a double agent. But it gets worse. She wasn't just working for Rivas. She was orchestrating this entire operation. She wanted the key, she wanted the vault, and she's been feeding information to Rivas for months." Alex's stomach churned. The woman he had trusted, the woman who had been his partner in this investigation, had betrayed him in the most unimaginable way. But it wasn't just the betrayal that stung. It was the realization that Lena had manipulated him from the very beginning, keeping him close just long enough to lead him right to the vault. "We need to go after her," Alex said, his voice low. We can't let her walk away with it. She's dangerous. Miller glanced at the chest resting in Alex's lap. We'll get her, but not now. We need to figure out what's inside that chest first. That's the key to everything, Alex. And if Lena gets her hands on it, we won't just be fighting criminals. We'll be fighting a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of power. Alex nodded grimly, his mind already racing ahead. The chest in his hands was more than just a collection of stolen goods. It was the weapon they needed to dismantle an entire network of corruption. But there was no time to celebrate yet. Lena was still out there, and the real battle was just beginning. Alex's head spun as they sped through the dark streets, the cool wind rushing in through the cracked window. He could still feel the burn in his side, the pain from the bullet graze, but he pushed it aside. There was no time for weakness, no time to focus on the physical agony. The chest in his lap was the key to everything now. Everything they had been working toward, everything they had uncovered. Miller was driving fast, keeping his eyes focused on the road, but his mind was clearly elsewhere. He had known more about the Echelon group than he had let on, and Alex's gut told him that Miller had more to reveal about Lena's betrayal. But for now, Alex had bigger questions. What's in the chest? Alex asked, his voice tense. He kept glancing down at the intricate carvings that adorned the wooden surface of the chest. He could feel the weight of it, like it was more than just a box. It was a symbol of everything they had fought for, and everything they still needed to uncover. Miller's eyes flickered briefly to the rearview mirror before responding. The chest is just the tip of the iceberg, Alex. But inside, well, it's more than just stolen art or relics. It's evidence, documentation, something that can bring down the entire network of the Alvazari group. Alex's heart skipped a beat. The documents inside weren't just about the crimes. They were about the people behind them. The politicians, the art dealers, the powerful figures who had been working with Rivas to run this criminal empire for years. But even more chilling was what Miller said next. Lena had access to all of this, he continued. She knew exactly what was in that chest, and she knew it was only a matter of time before we found it. She's been working for Rivas, yes, but she's also been working for someone else. Someone bigger. Someone bigger? Alex repeated, trying to wrap his mind around the implications. You mean Rivas isn't the end of this? Miller shot him a dark glance. Rivas is just the muscle. The real mastermind behind the network is someone with far more power. Someone who's been pulling strings in the shadows for decades. I'm not sure who yet, but I know this much. If we can get through this, if we can expose Lena and take the documents to the right people, everything changes. The Echelon group, the Alvazari network, it all crumbles. But we need to move fast. Once Rivas realizes Lena's double-crossed him, he's going to come after both of us. Alex stared at the chest in his lap, his pulse racing. The stakes were higher than ever. He had been thinking about the vault, about bringing down the criminals who had stolen millions in priceless artifacts. But this was more than that. It was about global corruption, about powerful people hiding their crimes behind a facade of wealth and influence. And now, Lena was a loose end, a dangerous one. The car slowed as they approached a safe house Miller had set up. It was a small, inconspicuous place on the outskirts of town, hidden from prying eyes. The perfect place to lay low for a while. All right, we need to go over everything in the chest. We can't risk anyone else knowing we have it, Miller said, as he parked the car in the dimly lit driveway. Alex nodded, his mind still buzzing with everything that had happened in the past few hours. He was exhausted, physically and mentally, but he knew there was no turning back now. Inside the safe house, Miller quickly secured the doors and pulled down the blinds. The small living room was sparse, with only a few chairs and a table in the center. Alex set the chest down on the table, his hands trembling slightly as he opened it. The chest creaked open, revealing several thick files, old photographs, and a set of keys. The documents were carefully organized, and the photographs depicted scenes of luxury, extravagant parties, hidden art collections, and meetings between powerful figures. Alex picked up one of the photos and studied it. It showed a group of men standing together, Rivas, a man Alex didn't recognize, and a few others. In the background, there was a tall building, a mansion, perhaps. "This is bigger than I thought," Alex murmured, his eyes scanning the photo. He had been focusing on the artifacts, the vault. But these images were more than just records of stolen goods. They were evidence of a far-reaching conspiracy, a network that spanned continents. Miller sat across from him, watching him closely. "That's the point, Alex. The vault, the artifacts, the money. It's all a cover. The real treasure is in those documents. They can bring down anyone from politicians to CEOs, people who thought they were untouchable." As Alex flipped through the documents, one particular file caught his eye. It was a letter, dated over a decade ago, from a government official to a well-known art dealer. The letter detailed a plan to smuggle stolen art through customs under the guise of legitimate shipments. Alex's fingers froze as he read the name of the official at the bottom of the letter. Senator Edward Grant. "What the hell?" Alex muttered under his breath. Miller leaned in, his face grim. "Grant's a major player. He's been in office for years. If he's involved in this, it's bigger than we thought," Alex finished. "Grant is a puppet master, and if he's tied to the Echelon Group, then the conspiracy is deeper than we could have ever imagined," Miller interrupted. "We need to get this to the authorities, but we can't trust anyone in the system. We have to be careful, Alex. We can't let them know we have this. If Grant or anyone else in power finds out, we're as good as dead." The room was heavy with the weight of what they had uncovered. The chest, which had seemed like a simple puzzle piece in a grander scheme, now felt like a ticking time bomb. The evidence inside was enough to take down a whole network of corrupt officials, criminals, and billionaires. But Alex knew they couldn't go to the police or anyone in power. There was no telling who was compromised. They needed to go underground. They needed to expose the truth without getting caught. "Lena will be back," Alex said, his voice low with determination. "And when she does, we need to be ready. We have no idea what she's capable of. If she gets her hands on those documents, it's over." Miller nodded. "Agreed. We're going to have to play this carefully, but we're not alone in this. There's still a chance to bring this down." Alex stared at the chest, the weight of everything hanging on their next move. It wasn't just about stopping Lena. It was about taking down a global conspiracy. And if they failed, the world would never know the truth. Days passed in a blur. Alex and Miller kept moving, hiding in plain sight, always a step ahead of Lena and Rivas's men. They reached out to trusted contacts in the intelligence community, piecing together a plan to bring the evidence to light. But every move they made, every contact they tried to reach, was met with obstacles. Lena wasn't the only threat they faced. The Echelon Group was a powerful machine, and they had eyes everywhere. It became clear that the conspiracy wasn't just about money or power. It was about maintaining control at all costs. But Alex and Miller had a new ally now. The documents in the chest. They had the truth on their side. And soon, the final confrontation would come. It would be the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The headlights of Ethan Myers' truck cut through the thick fog, that clung to the desolate stretch of road. It was well past midnight, and the eerie silence of the isolated highway made the hum of his truck's engine seem louder than usual. He'd been driving for hours, the long haul keeping him on edge. This stretch of road was always unnerving. No lights, no signs of life for miles, just endless trees that appeared like shadows in the mist. Ethan was a man of logic, grounded in practicality and skepticism. The kind of guy who didn't believe in ghost stories, rumors, or anything that couldn't be explained with solid reasoning. But tonight, something felt off. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As he rounded a curve, he noticed a figure standing on the side of the road. A young girl, no older than 18, dressed in a faded, old-fashioned coat. She stood still in the fog, her hair damp and matted. She was shivering, looking out of place on this deserted highway. Ethan hesitated for a moment, but the right thing to do was obvious. He pulled the truck to a stop, rolled down the passenger window, and called out, "You need a ride?" The girl turned her head slowly, her eyes wide with an odd mix of fear and relief. Her lips trembled as she stepped closer, the fog swirling around her like a ghostly shroud. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm stranded. Please, I need help. I'm Sarah." Ethan studied her for a moment. She looked out of place, almost like she didn't belong, but she was cold and alone, and the road was treacherous at this time of night. He sighed and unlocked the passenger door. "Hop in," he said, trying to ignore the unsettling sensation creeping up his spine. As soon as Sarah slid into the truck, Ethan immediately felt the temperature drop inside the cab. He glanced at her briefly but kept his eyes on the road. Sarah sat with her arms wrapped tightly around herself, her face drawn and pale. "You okay?" Ethan asked, trying to break the silence. She nodded but didn't speak for a while. Ethan let the quiet stretch on, focusing on the road ahead, his knuckles gripping the steering wheel a little tighter than usual. Something about her demeanor felt wrong. She seemed distant, as if she was lost in thought, or perhaps lost in time. "Where are you headed?" Ethan asked. Sarah's voice came out in a soft, almost distant whisper. "I'm just trying to get home. I don't really know where I'm going. I just need to get out of here." The cryptic nature of her words made Ethan uneasy, but he didn't press her. He turned on the radio, hoping the static noise would fill the uncomfortable silence. "I hate this road," Sarah spoke again, her tone still distant but tinged with something darker. "I fear it. This place. Something bad happened here." Ethan shot her a quick glance, but she was staring out the window, her gaze fixed on the fog that seemed to stretch forever in every direction. "Bad things happen on this road," she continued, her voice barely audible. "People don't come back." Ethan's unease grew, but he chalked it up to her fear. She was probably just scared of being out here alone. "You sure you're okay?" he asked, glancing at her more closely. "You're not hurt, are you?" "I'm fine," Sarah said, but there was a strange flicker in her eyes, almost like she was seeing something he couldn't. Suddenly, Sarah stiffened, her eyes darting to the side. "Stop the truck. I need to get out." Ethan frowned. "What? Are you sure?" "Please," she said, her voice urgent. "I need to get out now." Against his better judgment, Ethan pulled the truck over to the side of the road. The fog seemed to close in around them, a dense curtain that obscured everything beyond the truck's headlights. Before Ethan could speak, Sarah opened the door and stepped out into the thick fog. He was about to call out when, in an instant, she disappeared into the mist, vanishing without a trace. Ethan sat in stunned silence for a few moments, the engine idling. His heart raced. What the hell had just happened? One moment, Sarah was there, The next, she was gone. He rubbed his eyes, trying to make sense of it. Maybe she was just really desperate to get out of the truck, or maybe he'd imagined the whole thing. The fog had always made everything look a little strange, distorted, hazy. He reached over to pull the door shut, feeling uneasy, and put the truck in gear to leave. But as he turned his gaze back to the fog, something caught his eye. The distinct outline of a figure, Sarah, was walking slowly down the road, her back turned toward him. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. There was no way she could have crossed the road that fast. He blinked, and the figure was gone again. He quickly drove off, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that clung to him, like the fog itself. When he reached the next town, he stopped at the diner to grab a coffee. But even then, the images of the girl in the fog wouldn't leave him. He checked his phone, hoping for some distraction, when his eyes landed on a local news story that made his blood run cold. Sarah Richards, a young girl who died in a tragic car accident 10 years ago, has been remembered on the anniversary of her death. The crash occurred on a foggy stretch of Route 67, the very same stretch of road Ethan had just driven on. The article included a photograph of the girl, a picture of Sarah, wearing the same old-fashioned clothes she'd had on when she'd been in his truck. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. This couldn't be a coincidence. It was the same girl. His hands shook as he put the phone down and stared into his coffee cup, the reality sinking in. The girl he had given a ride to on that foggy night couldn't have been real. She had died 10 years ago. The next day, Ethan couldn't let go of the strange encounter. The more he thought about it, the more questions piled up. Sarah's appearance, her strange behavior, and the cryptic things she had said. It all added up to something that couldn't be explained away. He began his search by looking into Sarah Richards' death. The news article had mentioned the car accident on Route 67, but the more he dug, the more he uncovered. Sarah Richards had been involved in a violent car crash, but there were no clear answers. The police report claimed it had been an accident, but Ethan couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. He visited the local library, combing through old newspapers and reports, trying to find any hint of foul play. That's when he came across a small mention in an old article about Sarah's abusive boyfriend, Victor Graves. Graves had been arrested a few times for assault, but had never been charged with anything more serious. After Sarah's death, he had vanished from town, leaving behind a trail of rumors and unanswered questions. Some people said he'd been involved in the crash. Others whispered that it had been no accident at all. As Ethan delved deeper into the investigation, paranormal occurrences began to escalate. He started hearing strange noises at night, whispers, faint cries, and the sound of footsteps in the fog. One night, he even thought he saw a figure standing at the edge of his property, just outside his truck. He tried to dismiss it as his imagination running wild, but deep down, he knew something was wrong. He drove back to the stretch of Route 67 where Sarah had disappeared, the fog thick around him. The air felt colder now, almost unnatural, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. "Sarah," he whispered into the fog, unsure why he said it. "What happened to you? Who hurt you?" There was no answer at first, but then a cold gust of wind, and then a voice, so faint it was almost a breath. "Help me." Ethan's heart pounded as the fog parted slightly, and through the haze he saw her again. Sarah. Her ghostly figure stood just beyond the headlights, her pale face almost glowing in the mist. He stepped out of the truck, his breath visible in the frigid air. "I'm here," he called, his voice trembling. "I'm going to find out who did this to you." For a brief moment, Sarah's ghostly form flickered, almost as though she were trying to reach out to him. But as quickly as she appeared, she vanished into the fog. Ethan's investigation led him to an abandoned house on the outskirts of town. According to local rumors, it had once belonged to Sarah's family, but after her death, it had been left to decay. It was here that he uncovered the final piece of the puzzle. Hidden beneath the floorboards of an old dusty room was a collection of letters, evidence of the abusive relationship Sarah had endured with Victor Graves. One letter stood out, a final letter from Sarah, describing her fear of Graves and how she was planning to leave him the night of the accident. But she never made it. Ethan's pulse quickened as he pieced together the story. It wasn't an accident. Sarah had tried to escape, but Graves had forced her car off the road, killing her. And now, her restless spirit had returned, seeking justice. Ethan tracked down Victor Graves, now living under a different name in a nearby town. Confronting him, Ethan uncovered the chilling truth. Graves had staged Sarah's death to look like an accident, and the guilt had driven him into hiding. In a final confrontation, Ethan exposed the truth, calling the police and ensuring that Graves was arrested. As the authorities took Graves away, Ethan stood in the clearing where Sarah's ghost had once appeared. The fog had lifted, and the road seemed eerily peaceful. And just before Sarah vanished completely, she whispered, "Thank you." Ethan drove away from the town, his heart heavy with the weight of what he'd uncovered. He had found justice for Sarah, but the price had been high. His skepticism had been shattered, and the eerie truth of the supernatural world would remain with him forever. The road was still long, but for the first time, Ethan wasn't sure if he believed in just the world he could see. He glanced at the empty seat beside him. His life would never be the same again.